Hi, everyone. Today we are going to dive into intuitive cooking with Julianaa Satie from the School of Natural Cookery. It is an approach to plant-based cooking that I think that you are going to really find interesting and perhaps insightful in your own plant-based culinary journey. So make sure to stay tuned through the end where Rosie McKay, Food Revolution Network's community dietitian, nutritionist, and recipe developer, and I take just 15 minutes to unpack our own personal practices to guide intuitive cooking. So stay tuned for that at the very end after my interview with Julianaa Satie. Hello, everybody. Are you ready to revolutionize your kitchen experience? Discover how intuitive cooking can change your relationship with food, making it effortless, delicious, and joyfully natural. Julianaa Satie, founder and director of the School of Natural Cookery, and I will explore this revolutionary approach, offering you practical tips and heartfelt insights that will elevate your culinary practices and bring more creativity into your kitchen. In this inspiring conversation, you'll learn to tap into your intuition to create meals that nurture both your body and your soul. Whether you're a seasoned chef or just starting out, this interview promises to be both educational and inspirational. Let's learn to embrace a more mindful and enjoyable cooking experience and uncover the true joy of crafting wholesome, nourishing meals. Now, just to let y'all know, this is a project of Whole Life Club, which is a Food Revolution Network ongoing membership community. Some of the questions that I will bring to this interview today come from our Whole Life Club members. Nothing you hear today is medical advice. We are offering coaching and our own best insights. So always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding your specific healthcare realities and needs. So a little bit about Julianaa Satie, founder and director of the School of Natural Cookery, who brings over 40 years of experience in harnessing the healing power of high quality food store, food truck, private chef service, and cooking school. Julianaa also consults for restaurants and food services and contributes to the development of high quality food products. As the author of 3 books, including Amazing Grains and Romancing the Bean, she emphasizes making healthy food easy to prepare and delicious. Julianaa's journey from professional choreography to a focus on whole food and natural medicine inspired her creation of the language of intuitive cooking. With a commitment to simplifying cooking and promoting environmental health, she holds certificates in various holistic practices and remains dedicated to sharing her knowledge and passion for intuitive cooking. Welcome, Julianaa.
Hello, Nicole. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
great.
Yes, can hear you great, and we are very excited about this conversation today. How to tap into our intuitive senses in the kitchen. So I'm going to dive right into the questions, just about intuition in general and what is intuition and how can intuitive cooking transform our daily meal preparation and overall relationship with food?
Intuition is a combination of paying attention, not just to what you're feeling and what you're sensing, but what the food is going through. So this is a new relationship. It's what's revolutionary about it after 40 years is that the language of recipes and the system used for recipes is the same configuration that prevents people from having their own knowing and their own confidence. So that's kind of the big view. Yeah.
So how would someone start with this practice of intuitive cooking? How can somebody start practicing this at home?
Well, I've spent a lot of years organizing a system on which how to think about food and cooking. And there is a book called Intuitive Cooking from the School of Natural Cookery. And it's my 3rd book. And I do think it kind of gives the highlights of all that.
Now you've got my wheels turning. Could you share maybe your top 3 tips from the book?
You can do this right away. What you want to do is organize your cabinet, your kitchen, and your ingredients so that they're kind of in one part of your kitchen together. They're not all scattered around. And you probably do that anyway. But what happens in the process of inventing a dish is we need to start with one ingredient. It could be, oh, this basil is fabulous. I'm going to make something with basil. Oh, gosh, I have this leftover grain from the Chinese restaurant. What can I do with it? It's like you start with one ingredient. A primary element or a supporting element is how I put the language together. Because it's very much like writing a sentence. So if you can write a sentence with grammar, with punctuation, you can make a dish. It's that simple.
I like your idea of starting with one ingredient because I actually started using this in my own practice recently. I'm a big advocate for planning ahead and creating a menu ahead of time and planning ahead of time, but does it realistically happen in my own life? Probably not as often as I'd like. So, what I started doing was looking to see what I have excess in the fridge because you mentioned no waste. I hate wasting food from a financial perspective and the environmental perspective, and just we should be eating the food that we have available to us, right? So, yeah, so I started using that approach and I love it. Whether it's you have excess on hand, or I also just started recently using a local, like a CSA, and some of the foods that come in that box are unfamiliar to me. So I have to look them up, and that meal will just revolve around that ingredient, looking at the history behind the ingredient and how it's been historically used, or maybe cultural, whatever it might be, that sparks inspiration. So I love your idea of like focusing on one ingredient.
So here's the biggest shift. When you're cooking with what's in your house and I see so many people who are natural cooks who are trying to use a recipe for inspiration, then they do whatever they want. Okay, so there's a million people there. What I would recommend is, instead of looking at the finished dish that has a name that someone else designed and put into a recipe with a picture and the formulas and all the rest, all this, instead of trying to translate that without, well, we do recipe translation, but it's after you've learned the function of the ingredients. So I'm going to tell you how to learn from the function of the ingredient. So when you open your kitchen, is it a primary element or a supporting element? The primary elements are the nouns: grain, vegetables, and protein. Now, this is not a dietitian's translation. It comes from Energetic Nutrition for Cooks, and it's any quality of wholeness. That's where you start choosing for health. What's my grain? Is it whole? Is it bread? What's my vegetable? Is it frozen? Did I just get it fresh? Am I using a variety of vegetables? Because variety is the key in vegetables. Grain provides the energy to get out of bed, to get around the block. But that's where I would begin, is you start with a primary element and what makes them yummy, like the noun in a sentence or what the story of the dish is about. What makes them yummy is the supporting elements: oil, fat, salt is the punctuation. Herbs are like adjectives because they embellish the primary element. You buy a good carrot, you don't need anything with it,
Mm.
and then the cooking methods, some use oil and some don't. So that's where we balance the oil in the meal. And that's why if you plan your meal ahead, you can say, this is going to be where I put my oil in the tempeh, because tempeh really loves oil. And since I'm using tempeh, I better put the oil in that dish, and then I'll make a pickle or something fresh to go with it and no oil, and that kind of thing. You can do that design in a dish or in a meal.
We primarily offer our recipes. So I know we're talking about intuitive cooking here, but we do a lot of no oil cooking here. We do emphasize fats for, we of course, advocate fats in all meals just because number one, from a nutritional perspective, but also because they help to carry the flavors and deliver a mouthfeel that is so important as a part of a
Mhm.
dish.
Mhm.
So yeah, like using tempeh as your example, we may marinate it in maybe an acidic, like a lemon or a vinegar or a reduced sodium tamari, and then add a tahini based sauce to it versus like an oil based sauce. So
That
still have
is
that
oil.
fat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but a whole food version.
It's whole. And that's why I say these are the categories. You want to eat whole? I use walnuts and walnut milk all the time,
Mm,
anytime, and I start with my own walnuts because they go rancid easily. So you want to control them. I mean, all nuts. So exactly, tahini is it's an oil. And when you think in those categories and the function, like you just said, it's so familiar. It makes sense, and there's no drama. It's really easy. You just say, "Oh, I want to do a creamy style sauce. What nut should I make into a nut milk or cream or
mm,
butter?" Or, "Oh, I have these peanut butter. Peanut butter."
yeah.
So yeah, that's the way the mind works. Instead of trying to go outside yourself, you pick the categories and how you want to build the dish. Now you can look at your recipes, you use them, people can use your recipes and begin to look at the categories and how you're putting it together. And after you do about a million of those, you'll be just the language will just be right in there. I don't mean a million.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's infinite possibilities when you don't use a recipe.
Right. No, I see how it can like open up a world of possibilities when you're not, well, just going back to what you said, when you see the name of a recipe and the format, and you're kind of locked into creating whatever that might be. If it's like, um, if you're doing, I'm just thinking like Italian pasta with red sauce, and your mind, maybe you add some extra vegetables to it, but you're locked into that red sauce and Italian pasta versus starting with just like a whole grain noodle and some fresh vegetables. And do you want, like you mentioned, creamy or more like umami flavor with the tomato, but thinking more, is that what you're saying? Like thinking more in flavors and textures and starting from scratch in that way, but having your bases like the whole grain and the vegetables and then the protein.
One of the things you get from a recipe is a form. Sometimes we call them forms. It's how it's presented. So a casserole like lasagna has grain, vegetables, protein, and sauce. Spanakopita, grain, vegetables, protein, and some sort of sauce. There's a little
Mm,
bit of it. Does traditionally it would be egg,
mhm,
blended egg, but and feta cheese. But I've done it with tofu, and the wetness of that needs a little binder. So you think, oh, what are the binders in sauce? There's a nut sauce. There's flour sauce. There's the binder. Our sauces are designed by binder, not by the name of the Provence or the person who invented it.
right.
So when you see the binder, you go, oh, yeah, I know how to use that. Oh, what am I going to use for a binder? This is
Mm,
thick. I want to, it takes you down a journey when you don't have an end goal. On the other hand, when you do have enough, it's totally appropriate to explore recipes, but analyze them from this language, from the system. And then when you go to cook, you're putting more juice in it, but also you can shift on a dime. You might
mm.
decide to make it a green sauce instead of a red sauce.
Someone who is maybe just new to plant-based eating may want to use some of these techniques in while they're following a recipe, and then others who have been practicing plant-based eating for a long time and are familiar with a lot of the recipes can maybe tap into this more immediately. So depending on where you are in your journey, maybe just taking like, a couple of these tips as you move through that journey and implementing some of what Juliana's mentioning here?
There is a guideline for going into the plant-based balance and when you're cooking. And it's different from the classical French. So you can't translate, I mean, you can translate an animal meal, but you'll have to be mindful that each primary element needs its own complete process before they go in the dish. Because tempeh does not make rice taste better. Rice does not make tempeh taste better. And vegetables might help a little, but both those things will suck the vegetable dry. We won't add anything. So when we have it's a triangle of primary elements, we focus on a complete cooking method where they get if there's an oil method or if it's a sauce or where the salt goes. I mean, the sauce can bring it all together, but when you take a bean, raw bean, dry bean, you're not going to cook it with rice in the first stage. So we have these stages of cooking so that you can have food ready to do a 5-minute meal. And they're properly digestible. Digestion with seeds is important. And that's probably the best thing to study first if you're new to making your own beans. No salt, just get them soft. Not too much water or they'll be blotted out, and there's an art to it. So once you get that down, and you probably have it, you can also buy, beans that don't have salt in them in a can, and that's really a good idea. So, but that's what you would look for, beans with no salt. There's so many layers to it.
Well, I loved that tip that you just gave. Yeah, that's very helpful. I was just going to ask how people can tap into this tuition. What would be your advice?
Well, everybody has it, so they know what it is. It's that gut feeling that you don't want to eat that. When you cultivate, I use the chakra system. And there are many teachers who you can study that with. The idea of asking questions, you have to ask the right question to get an answer. So when it comes to using intuition on what to eat, I use the same template that I do when I cook. How much fat do I want today? What can my body handle today? What's the weather? What's this and that? We use grammar, it's called. Taste, smell is one of the grammar principles, and it's a theory that supports intuitive cooking. And the other one is called to fit. And there's another one called numbers that's designing how you design dishes and things, how to fix a dish that's not right. But if you study and observe, taste, smell, I'll teach you how to do that. And to fit, you will have the two biggest techniques to practice where you'll be knowing what to use and how much. So that'll help get away from having to measure, because once you measure, it takes you out of yourself and you're using someone else's idea and you hope they got it right because it's expensive to cook and have food go bad. I've had that happen. That's what probably motivated me the most. I raised, a family of 6, and I would cook a lot, and I follow a recipe and I go, this is not working. So, and a lot of other reasons. But so, would you like to know?
I was going to ask that. Yeah. Could you expand? We would love, yeah, some like take home, let's practice this today. Like what, yeah, how can we start practicing today?
So, I don't label my herb spices because I've used them a lot. I can look at them and know what they are, but I don't try to use that part of my body. If you're using your mind about what goes with what, and you're sitting here like this thinking, well, does lemon go? Lemon goes with garlic. Lemon and basil go together. And if your mind is going down that road, it's going to take you a long time to get dinner on. Intuition is nanosecond. You just know. So we use something called taste smell. You're building a cold sauce, a marinade, let's say. So this marinade uses oil in my thought. So I'm going to start with, you pick a nut butter. So you pick the whichever nut butter you want. Make it extraordinary because no one's going to waste any food here today. So now it's in your knowledge and your imagination. Let's say you're interested in Brazil nuts for some reason. Someone gave them to you. You don't really like them, but you've got a whole bunch of Brazil nuts, and so, and they have a different kind of substance, but still they're nut, they're fat, they're fiber, they're whole. For example, so stretch for a minute, Nichole, and think about a seed or a nut.
Okay. How about pistachio butter?
Ooh.
I love pistachios.
Okay, so because pistachio butter would dirty too many pans, and we don't want to. One of the questions was about washing too many dishes. We're going to make this cold sauce in a blender.
Okay.
And you're going to start by pulverizing the pistachios. And they get pulverized. Now, to make the technique for a nut cream or nut milk is to pulverize them first. Add the amount of cooking liquid as a supporting element. So we have the fat and the cooking liquid. Now, cooking liquid is everything and anything wet. It could be a sauce. It could be your tomato sauce. It could be pomegranate syrup. Could be one of them. And it could be water. And one of these is cooking liquid's function is, you mentioned the function of oil. So I'm going to talk about the function of cooking liquid. So not only does it control the substance, but there are 3 different ways to use a cooking liquid, anything wet, 3 different ways, and we name them major, meaning at least 50% of the sauce is going to be this major cooking liquid, 50%. But then we have, and it could be 75%, it could be 100%, too many options. Now we have a minor cooking liquid, and its function is to bring flavor in, but it also creates substance. So it'll make whatever you have binder or whatever you're working with wetter. So it's just not going to add flavor. It's going to change the substance. So that's why it's in the cooking liquid format. And then we have something called accent liquid, which you never taste when you're using it. You're using it only because you made this fat and liquid, and you have your herbs and your salt in there, but it's dull on the palate. It just goes heavy, and I can't get all the herbs and the flavor out. And there's plenty of salt in there. I don't want more salt. Salt is really interesting. I could talk a whole hour on salt. So, but you have maybe 3 drops in a cup of lemon juice or vinegar, something acid that you aren't going to taste, and it makes the movement and it rounds out dull flavors. Beans in particular can do that, so can nuts and seeds, because beans, by the way, have their own natural fat. So that's a dull thing on the palate, creamy, heavy. So it doesn't have to be heavy because you're going to adapt the substance. Okay, so now we need you to pick 1, 2, 3 cooking liquids. Just trusting yourself on what I'm going to teach you next is the layering and to fit. So how much of oil, how much liquid, how much salt. It's either a ratio for controlling substance or it's to fit.
Hmm. Okay.
I know you wanted to ask something. Oh, no, I asked you. I want you to pick the liquid.
The liquids, yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned pomegranate molasses, which I'm so intrigued by, and I feel like with pistachios, that would be a nice complement. So maybe not too much. So, you mentioned three liquids. I think that it would be maybe, um, and also, of course, I'm thinking from the nutritional perspective. I don't want too much. I want, it's nice to have a little sweetness. We don't want to like overly sweet. So maybe like the ratio would be half pomegranate molasses and maybe some water to add some more liquid. And then that last one, I'm thinking like a little acidic, maybe like a splash of apple cider vinegar or like a sherry vinegar. What do you think? Does that sound terrible?
Oh, no, it's a normal thought process. So
Okay.
what I kind of put you on the spot because when you're building with taste smell, you have to taste what's in the bowl. Now, I would munch up a raw, you start chewing on a Brazil nut, and then you go and you smell the pomegranate syrup. And there's this place in the brain, it's called a tentorium, and it goes right in from here on the plumb line where these two meet in the brain. It's like a little butterfly. And when you taste, all your taste buds are meet the olfactory in you inhale. So you're going to put in your bowl or in the blender uh, the nut, pulverize it so you can see how much is there. We're going to talk about layers later. See how much is in there, blended, powdered, or not. It could go into a cream. It doesn't have to go that far because we're going to add liquid. But then you taste that and you go smell cooking liquids that are strong. There are strong character cooking liquids and mild. So it makes sense that pomegranate, it's in the same culture. So we can we can read a whole book on Persian cooking and see what herb spices they use and this and that, and just go cook your rice and beans the way you do and use those, and they're going to be, it's really cool.
Mm.
But when you're inventing, you want to taste, smell, and this takes a moment to get used to doing, and it's really fun. If you had more than one ingredient, let's say you have apple cider vinegar and pomegranate syrup. Now pomegranate syrup is going to be sweet, but it's also very acid.
Mm.
And the main thing you have to think about when you're blending something is the color. Taste the pistachio, it's green. When you blend red and green, what color do you get?
Probably brown, is that right? It's not going to look too pretty. Although I like brown, but maybe not for food.
Yes, and natural foods have a reputation for everything being brown. But in the art
True.
of, you have a choice. So you may choose a different liquid. So then you smell both and you just see. You taste what's in the bowl, what you know you're going to use, and the ingredient category, in this case liquid, is unknown. You smell, because then when you breathe in, you have what those two things will be like in your brain in the dish.
Mm.
And if it's an absolute yes, you're good to go. You don't have to look at anything else. You can write a recipe on it. If it's no, probably better not to use today. It's probably not good for you today, or it just wouldn't go, whatever reason. No, not today. If it's a maybe, nothing, you can use it and it'll be just fine. If it's the only thing you have in your kitchen and you want to use up those lemons because they're really turning, but you're going to do it with black beans and you're wondering, is that going to work? Well, in general, it's so hard to ruin whole, clean food when you follow these ideas, you know?
So when you're smelling, say we have the pulverized pistachios and we're considering the pomegranate molasses, you would smell them each separately before adding them together?
No, you don't want to work too hard. You really don't want to wear out your brain by thinking. You go, okay, I got my pistachios. You go look at the cupboard to your cooking liquids in the fridge or on the counter, any fruit juice, whatever. If you have oranges, you might score the orange. You go, is that a fit? Um, and you need to not think about it. That's
Hmm.
going to be the hardest thing to get for people is if you're staring at your food and you're looking at a recipe or worksheet or something where you're just wondering what to do, you just have to pick the next ingredient and taste smell, and you'll know. And it happens like this. So
Okay.
that's where your intuition takes over. The intuition is in the non-physical body.
Hmm.
So if and it's it's closer to the heart than it is the mind.
It completely makes sense. Yeah. I was just going to reflect on that for a moment because I think I've seen my husband in action with his, he does not follow any recipes. And he cooks plant-based at home. He's not all plant-based, but he cooks plant-based at home. I'm grateful for that. And I do most of the cooking, but I'm always thinking of like recipe and how can I help somebody else translate this in their own kitchen. And when he cooks, he thinks about something. He just he does what you just described. He will go into the refrigerator and he'll open things up and he'll smell them and he'll be like, hmm. And I'm looking and I'm like, why are you adding that? I question like, what are you doing? And I would never put those together. And what? And he's like, I don't know. It seems like it would be okay. Like he completely just I never thought of it as intuitive cooking, but I think that's what he does. And I always try to recreate because they always turn out delicious. I feel like he never has a compost meal. I'm like very specific and some end up in the compost and he never has like everything is always delicious. And I never would have added this. Like, how much did you put? And he's like, I don't know. I can't, we can never recreate anything that he creates because it's all very intuitive. But I think he practices this without knowing that this is a part of what you teach. um, so yeah, it's interesting to hear you describe it in that way. So maybe other people on the call have someone they know that they can kind of like observe in this way as well, or maybe they're doing it themselves.
Yeah, it's not a big what I'm what I was told to do is teach the process of cooking, right? I'm going, oh, okay, that's better than doing a recipe book. I guess I could do that. So I had to go inside, and actually, the way I would choreograph a dance is to say, what do I want to have people feel? And then I would find a movement that would lead. So I like to teach improvisation
Mm.
because that's practicing in that's the art of integrating your natural cooking and expanding and being challenged in a limitation with see the creativity has to work whether you have everything available to you and three things.
Mm.
And so being in a box only knowing the same dish with those three things is not healthy because variety is really what's stimulating and getting all the organs and all the different communications going on in the body. But he's a natural cook.
Yeah.
So, what I found worth when I was kind of told to write this book, I thought, okay, well, how do I explain what I do? And that's why I have all these sort of nuanced things that I can trust because after 50 years, I'm going, geez, this thing works, it works. And so let me take it a little bit further and say, how did he know how much to put in? So, see, I know how great cooks work. That's the language I can share. So here you go. It's called either a ratio to get the substance right, or it's a to fit. And that question, that concept to fit is huge. To fit the day, to fit the weather, to fit your body, to fit how many people. So you have to start somewhere. And I always say it's to fit the container and the layers within the container. So in order to not have extra dishes around in pots, you have to pick the right size that will fit the amount of food you want. And you might want leftovers. So in the cold sauce we're making, we have the ratio. There are ratios for the marinade. It's depending on what primary element you're using. So the oil is 1 part to 5 parts liquid. The amount of liquid is going to be, my knuckle is 1 inch. 1 inch in the bottom of the bowl. So now I know that the amount of oil is going to be 1/5 of that, this amount. The cooking liquids we haven't decided yet. She's going to smell that. And you might start with a character liquid. Now, normally I do use a little water when nut butters are in the cold sauce. But technically, if you were using olive oil or a different kind of oil, processed, refined oil, somewhat refined, you wouldn't want to use water because it just will take away all the flavor.
When you say oil, though, like we're talking about the pistachio that I just mentioned, you're saying the fat, right?
You
Okay.
imagine these nuts in a milk or cream,
Hmm.
and the liquid for that cream is not necessarily water. It could be pomegranate and water. It could be, but you have to put the pomegranate in first if you don't mind the color.
Hmm. We're gonna get over the color for this one.
So
Well,
so you taste that combination of pistachio and pomegranate. You taste it like you're wine tasting,
yeah.
and you breathe in the apple cider vinegar,
Okay.
because because you probably are going to need water to get the
Yeah.
substance you want with
I
that.
think that was my second ingredient, my second liquid. So the pomegranate molasses, water, and then the apple
Yeah.
cider vinegar.
So you have water as a major liquid. Minor cooking liquid would be pomegranate syrup because it could be 20%,
Okay. That makes sense.
and um, and that's probably enough. You'd be surprised. Now, an herb spice category. Now you have your oil, your cooking liquid blended smooth, and you're going to taste it, and you're going to go around. Fresh herbs are nice in marinade. You can use dry herbs or dry spices. But if you have a garden this time of year and you want to go out to your garden while you're slapping around the combination of pomegranate and water and you got the substance, and you find something, you don't think about what would go. That's going to slow you down. That's the key. The thing is, you have to start trusting your body. So you have the 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 process of crushing the herb and smelling it. It's yes, no, maybe, and it goes that fast. It actually goes faster. Yes, no. Yes, no. Maybe. Okay, maybe. I can use that. Dinner's on in 5 minutes. I can use it. I'll go use it. You don't have to write a cookbook with each one. So that's that's the identifying how ingredients go together. Now, when it comes to how much, should I move on, or do you have any more questions?
I think that makes sense just to kind of go through what you just said, though. So let's say we're making the pistachio and the pomegranate together, just so that everyone understands at home who's listening. Pomegranate and the pistachio together, and if we're considering apple cider vinegar or any whatever other component the liquid, the last liquid component you're considering, you would taste that and smell the apple cider vinegar to see if they would be a good combination, and then consider adding an herb on top of it after you add that last liquid. Add maybe an herb to it to round out the flavors.
It's not a consideration, it's a have to. It's like
Mm,
these elements, these supporting elements complete the dish. It's how much you put in of things that you have a choice about. But you shouldn't have a choice of whether you use salt or whether you use herbs or whether you use oil if it's an oil method. It's just which ones.
mm,
So if you keep that in mind and you're adding them because herbs and spices embellish the primary element. Now these grains are dull. So let's go heavy. In tabbouleh, the mint is almost as much as the parsley. I mean, the mint
yeah.
is really strong. And then it has to sit. That's the method.
Hmm.
With salt. We get salt in there to make all the flavors come. And I choose salts the same way. Miso or, might be a nice option. Umeboshi is great if you don't have lemon because it's sour and salty, so it
Mm.
often finishes a dish. Anyway,
Yeah. I think that's important to point out too, because we do add um, salty elements to dishes. You know, we have a lot of folks who may do no oil, no sugar, no salt. But we will sometimes maybe not add, we usually, if we have salt, specifically salt in a recipe, it's always an option for folks, but it include some miso or coconut aminos or something that has like a little bit of a salty element to it, some salt added to it because they're higher in sodium, but they don't have to add extra salt. But just knowing that, a little bit of sometimes just at least in our experience, like what we will, a lot of times when we do our live cooking demonstrations, of course, salt is always optional depending on your personal preference and if you are avoiding extra salt for medical reasons. But sometimes just like a little pinch of salt makes a big difference in a dish that may have all of these beautiful spices, and you keep adding more spices thinking that you're going to, up level the flavor, but it's not maybe going anywhere. And sometimes you don't, you have enough spices, and just that little pinch of salt really helps to elevate the flavor of the spices. Would you agree with that?
I could talk for an hour on salt, how to use it, how to think about it, how to cook when I used to do private chefing for people who were quite ill. And this one woman was on dialysis. And I said, well, I just want to know if you had salt, what's the limit? What's percentage? And she said, enough to fit on my little fingernail.
Hmm.
I said, great. I used it in methods, just a few grains, because the transformational power of a good quality crystal salt. There's crystal salts and there's finishing salts. There's
Hmm.
food salts. So if you have food salts, there's no crystals on your body. When you give people the choice of whether they have salt at the end of a meal, when it's on the table, you probably don't do that. But some people do, and it's an old pattern, and it's probably the most toxic way to use salt.
Hmm.
So if a chef or a cook doesn't take responsibility for using well, okay, when you are cooking to fit, it's how much salt. Okay, let's just talk about that. How much salt does this sauce need? Hmm. Very tight fingers, once across. That's the minimum. If it's this much sauce, I'd probably do because sauce is very light. There'd probably be a layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 layers. Now my left brain, my mind has something to do. It says there are 14 layers of water in here. And this is the substance of my sauce. It's very thin, very dense molecules of the water. Very thin. So if I were to do 14 across like this, I squeeze my fingers very tight, let the salt come out, and it would seem like a lot, right? But what the to fit does is it asks you to use your left brain to identify the substance that's in there. If this were a bowl of carrots cut in owl cut bulky, there'd be 2 layers. But it's water. We gotta make it, all the flavor we're putting in here dance together, and salt is a chemical, it's not a food. The crystals, it's a chemical, so we're very careful. But it only works in liquid and fire and time. It's the major transformation of plants. It's the major cellular transformation they go through so we can digest them. We need salt. How much? Don't know. Everyone's different. That's what I think. I just think, you can lose, it's just the most important ingredient to know how to work with and to use. Because when you cook with it, the liquid comes out of the food. The cells change in the food. All the harmony happens in everything you put in your oil choice, in your herb spice choice, in the liquids. They merge. They merge and brings harmony. That's its function. It brings harmony. And if it's too salty, well, there's things about that. But the point is, layering to fit is from the heart center. It's an extension of the arm. So your left brain goes 14 layers. My heart now goes, I always say, what's one look like? And if I let out too much, I go, oh, that's enough. But if I'm very careful and conscious, you wouldn't believe what this does. So we're cooking from the heart. So I drop down from my third eye where I've said, okay, 14 layers. Now I drop down here. I forget about everything up here. And I focus just in the heart, which is an extension of the hand. The hand is an extension of the heart. Bring it in. Pay attention. 1, 2, 3, and your hand stops. You're done. And it's perfect. Now, when you're cooking for ill people or you're cooking for other people, athletes, whatever, you hold them in your heart and you go, how many layers does this person need? It works every time. It's those two things, taste, smell, and to fit, are your doorways to feeling free forever with cooking whatever you have.
Well, thank you for giving those examples. Yeah, those were that was excellent to hear. And that's a taste, pun intended. That's a taste of your book, what's in your book too. Those two elements. So thank you for expanding further on those. And I love the idea of holding someone in your heart when you're preparing food for them. Sorry to use my husband as an example again, but like the differences between our cooking styles, we're very different. And I have a very hard time cooking for other people. It's terrible. I'm embarrassed to admit that. But we have family over and people have different dietary, and I think that might be my problem. And he is so heart sent, like just knows every single person, what they want, what they need, adds a little of this for this person and leaves this out for that person. And is so, I feel like it's a skill, but maybe it's coming from the heart. And like, for anyone else listening who struggles with this, like I do, like tapping into your heart and thinking thinking more about that person may be helpful. So that was a really helpful tip. Thank you. And also I just wanted to say about the salt, because I just want to be like mindful of folks who do follow, the no salt added diet. I think it's important, of course, to adhere to any medical treatments you're following. But it's also really, and it's very helpful to hear the culinary perspective of sodium, salt, and not that you need a lot, because I think we're so used to just in this environment with so many, with, the typical westernized approach diet, salt's very high, and that's not, it's a very different salt experience than what we're talking about here. We are talking about enhancing other elements in the food, and just to, you know, kind of reiterate what you said, sometimes it's a little bit, and we'll often suggest to folks at the end of a recipe, if you want to salt, it's optional, but if you do, salt to taste. But just what you described is like, this is kind of where this comes in, following your intuition, salting to taste, and following with your heart and what, how much you think you should add, and what really brings that meal together for you.
Yeah, the idea of salt is um, it should not, your food should never taste salty.
Got it.
It's never about that. It's about bringing harmony to the dish.
I love that, bringing harmony to the dish. I would love to get to a couple questions. I know we're like running. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I know we had a few Whole Life Club member questions that, if we
Okay.
can get to those, that would be amazing. Um, so Colleen asks, how do you get over the everyday part of food, like the day after day of thinking about what to have, what to buy, what does everybody want, the whole process. So how do you get over that process of what to make every day?
Well, it's a combination of knowing how to shop and knowing how to look at food, rhythm, the rhythm of the food. And the rhythm of the food for grain and beans, for example, if you're making your first stage grain and beans, meaning you're not using canned beans, although they're always good to have around.
Yeah.
So you have a balance of variety of the way vegetables grow and the color. So one week I might do cabbage, one week I might do broccoli. These are long standing, durable vegetables, last a couple weeks or more in the fridge.
Yeah.
Not that I make that happen, but I can count on them. Onions are generic if you eat onions. They're always good to have one or two. And I buy different sizes so I can use the whole thing. Um, the way you shop by color and by growing family. So vegetables there's 7 families, and they're the cook's family: mushrooms, seaweed. It's how the vegetables grow that we study, tells us how we're going to cook them. Our, what they need, kind of how much sun, how much fire do they have, that kind of thing. So nature is a real important part of all this, balancing your pantry so you always have something to make is the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
Trusting yourself to start. So I would look at stages of cooking for grain and beans, because once you have first stage grain, it means like water and rice, or water and beans, no salt. And they're in the beans can be frozen, but the grain shouldn't. So you have these, and maybe you've built some flavor into the beans, and they're really yummy. And all you need to do is bring both of these grains into a skillet or into a second stage of marinade. Now marinades like we just made, especially for vegetables, last a week. But it's a second stage method in plant-based cooking. It's not a pre-treatment like it is for animals.
Right.
So you have to have cooked grain, cooked beans, cooked vegetables, usually with no oil because the marinade has oil. And then those will last a week. Now, did I get any of those answers?
I think that actually helps a lot. I hopefully Colleen feels like it's helpful too, but I think that helps thinking in state, like thinking of having your base, the grain and the legumes and the vegetables done, and the marinade separate. So once you have those done, bringing a marinade in, just thinking about or feeling, I feel like saying thinking in this context is not what we want, but like, what do we want to create with that from the heart, and bringing the marinade, like what we just talked about, into it. But it's more of like and we talk about this a lot, like sauces and dressings being like the finishing touch on a meal, or bringing it all together, versus what you mentioned, having it like not sitting necessarily overnight with a grain and a bean, but just having it being like the last touch of a meal to really elevate that dish.
So I like to use on first stage grain a hot sauce. Maybe it's a vegetable blended vegetable sauce. Then I have my grain vegetable, and I could have a bean patty or something like that with it, or bean soup.
Mm-hmm.
Bean soup uses no oil. Clear soup uses no oil. Steeping, uh, pressure steaming, pressure cooking, maybe. Anyway, the idea, and you can mix binders like that too, so that you can use whole nut creams instead of saute your vegetables first. There's infinite possibilities. The organization is all three primary elements during the day, if not in the same meal.
But having those three primary elements, so the vegetable, the protein, and the grains, and then we have our sauce. Okay,
And it
so
can
we
be
got
in
it.
one dish, it can be in a bowl, or it can be three separate things. It's the way you
Yeah.
design it.
Okay. And then Colleen also asked, what is your favorite food to make when a friend or friends come over for lunch?
Whatever it takes about 10 minutes.
So what type of meal would take you 10 minutes?
Well, one of my favorites right now is making a cream style lemon soup
Mm.
where yellow zucchini gold bar are the binder of the soup, and put some maybe cashew or a little blonde nut in there. So when I blend everything, it's creamy and light. And I use
Mm.
I use lemon juice and lemon zest from the
Mm.
lemon, the zest and the juice, and that's so simple. A little bit of salt to make that oil work and
Yeah.
balance. And I pressure cook it. It takes about 10 minutes.
I think it's helpful that you said that, your zucchini is your binder. It brings it all together. And then the lemon zest that brightens it, and also a blonde nut. So there you're thinking, that's like intuitive thinking about the color of the nut. So you want the brightness of the soup. So you're thinking about the color. You're also thinking about the bright citrus flavor with the lemon zest. And not thinking, but like
No, I am
intuitively
thinking.
pulling out. Okay.
No, absolutely thinking. I need a binder. Okay, I'll use this. It's yellow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to use a lemon. It's talking to me. Lemon. The zest is the herb spice. The juice is the cooking liquid. The identity of the soup is not zucchini. It's a
Mm.
lemon soup. And a little saffron might be nice, or a little
Mm.
turmeric,
Ooh,
or a little curry. I mean, any of that could work. I do it with winter squash like that all the time.
that's so
And an
good.
onion is always given in that.
Yeah.
And you have to develop the flavor of the vegetables. Okay, go into technique. I won't do that to you. But so intuition is only as valuable as you know the structure of what you're doing with fire, the earth, the ingredients, the herbs, air, the water, the cooking liquid. And so you want to feel, observant of what those ingredients are doing to inform your memory so your intuition can work.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, Colleen has one more question. I have a tagine and I've never used it. It's just taking up space. Is this something I should be using, or is there something else that I have that would do the same job? I also have a Dutch oven and I like the Instant Pot. So she's wondering basically if she should keep her tagine. Does it do something different, have a different function than her Dutch oven and Instant Pot, or should she give it away? Any suggestions?
Well, I can try to give you some guidelines on what to think about. I can't tell you what to do. Um, Sounds like it's a clay pot, which I think is very cool to cook in.
Hmm.
For, but I've never used one, and for me, a Dutch oven in a small kitchen um, is more practical.
Hmm.
So I can't answer that for you. I think when you look at fire, it has an open tube so that something's going to escape. And to me, I'd rather keep everything in the pot.
Mm.
So depending on what it was used for, traditionally, I think they were used for outdoor cooking, open campfire type cooking, and that might be a different technique. I don't know the techniques for cooking.
Yeah, no, I actually just I was just looking into one myself, Colleen, and the one thing I will say that I learned from my research in tagine is that it needs to be at a very low flame, because it just the process is slower. So I think if you're in a rush or if you want a quick meal, I don't think that is the one to use. So maybe thinking about the time that you have on hand, and if you want to experiment with like um, a cultural adaptation of a recipe, or and you have the time and you want to explore a little bit, I think that could spark inspiration personally. But also, definitely time was a consideration. I know when I was looking into it, I was like, do I have the time for this? Because it needs to cook slow.
I think I think it was designed for meat,
For
and it
slow
was
cooking.
designed
Yeah.
when people were traveling across the earth and they had to rest and build a fire and hunt and bring in their food. And the tangine is slow because I think meat probably likes that. I don't know how to cook meat that
Yeah.
well, but you might research that, because I'm going to say, if this is the last thing I say, it's probably the most important. Vegetables, grain, and plant protein do not respond to French cooking techniques, which
Mm,
are based in animal and dairy.
mm,
They are different as night and day. How you use fire, how you use oil. Um, it's easier, it's less fussy. See, if we ever go into energetic nutrition, you'll see the quality of what plants is about is spiritual food. And we don't won't go there today. But I just think that might be an answer for you, depending on what you like.
mm.
I like the slow. And I think it was an open fire. I mean, I saw it done on an open camping
Yeah,
stove in Morocco. And they were doing.
that's neat. That's very neat. Well, thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and guidance with us today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I know that I learned lots, and I'm going to be practicing. I definitely am going to be leading with the heart from now on. Now on, where can folks find you and find out more about your intuitive cooking techniques? I know you mentioned your book earlier.
Yeah, um, naturalcookery.com. So you're welcome to reach out.
Thank you, Juliana. We really appreciate your time today and answering our questions and giving us some insight and inspiration for our own intuitive culinary journeys. Thank you.
I look forward to hearing stories. How you're
Yes,
doing? Okay, great.
absolutely. Everybody share. Thanks, Juliana.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so now that you've listened to Juliana's fascinating approach to intuitive cooking, Rosie and I thought we would share our own intuitive experiences in the kitchen. So, Rosie, hi.
Hi, Nicole. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat about this with you because I know you have some really good stories to share around intuitive cooking too. So, just to start from the very basics, how do you tap into your own culinary intuition?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, for me, it definitely depends on the need. I am not really a recipe follower by nature. So, I think I'm cooking intuitively most times I prepare a meal, but the time that stands out for me the most is when I'm short on ingredients, but I still want to have a satisfying and as well-rounded meal as possible. So what I'll usually do, and this happens more so towards the end of the week, and I'm sure there's some people who can relate, like, you've already done your weekly shop, you're running out of things, but you're not quite ready to go to the grocery store just yet. So I'll take a look around and see what I have. And then I'll kind of do an assessment of what I'm craving. And I know Juliana had talked about this too. Like, what do you have a taste for? And I think that's a great way to lead into tapping into your intuition because it can help give you a roadmap, especially if you're not going to be following a recipe. So usually I have a craving for savory, saucy, and hearty things, especially towards the end of the week after a long week. I don't want to have to think too much about what I'm making. And so I'll just pull out ingredients that fit that bill based off what I have. So usually that ends up meaning that I've created something that's got some tangy flavors, some zesty flavors in there. Maybe it's a little spicy. A noodle almost always makes an appearance at this point because that is the pantry staple of mine. I'm a huge fan of brown rice noodles. And I'll just take it from there. So if I have some leftover arugula, maybe some kale, because there's usually a veggie somewhere around, a canned bean, since that's always in my pantry as well. And I just have fun. And by the end of it, I'm usually very satisfied, and I will find myself wanting to recreate meals very similar to that again. But the irony of that is I rarely do until I don't have enough ingredients left over at the end of the week. But it's a fun way to challenge myself and to really start to engage my senses with what's around me.
I love that. Yeah, you're like just aware of what you have on hand and using what you have and getting it sparks creativity when you just have limited ingredients. And I feel like that could be a TV show. I've got this. What can you make with it? This is all you have. What can you make with this? Um, yeah, that's great. And I'm with you on the noodles. They're so yummy. So, and they can usually create anything delicious.
And they really are.
Yeah,
Yeah. But how about you,
exactly.
Nicole? How do you tap into your culinary intuition?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my approach has changed since, well, before I used to create recipes, I was really kind of um, just doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and very different than what Juliana was suggesting in the interview, where she wasn't recommending necessarily just tasting, but the taste smell component. Maybe I did a little bit of that without realizing it, but definitely like tasting as I go and adding some things that maybe felt like they would fit into a recipe. If it was pasta, I always go to pasta because I mean, that's what I grew up on. And it's always some things like you with the noodles, that's like my
Oh,
base. And then
there.
what can I add that's going to go? Like, do I have herbs on hand and what vegetables do I have? But in that same vein, for me, I'm very, I try, I shouldn't say no, definitely not no waste, but like low waste or minimal waste. I try to minimize waste as much as possible in the kitchen. So I typically lead with that mindset of what do I have on hand that needs to be used up? And I'll do this every few days. I'll check my fridge and see, things get pushed back. I'm sure that this can happen to a lot of us. Things, you start adding things, leftovers and foods that accumulate from the week and other things get pushed back. So I say use the first in, first out approach and keep those things that you put in first to the forefront so you can see them. But I don't, sometimes you're just in a rush and you just shove things in there, so they get lost.
Mhm.
So making it a routine to check the fridge every few days, and then whatever is on its like last couple of days, last day or two, that becomes the focus of my recipe. And what I'm going to do with that, I don't know. It may be that I have other things similar to you, like what ingredients do I have on hand? What will go well with like wheat berries I just had. So I had some leftover wheat berries that were pre-made, and they're pretty, you can make a grain bowl out of them and stuff. But I also had some tomatoes that needed to be used up. So I'm like, what can I do with these two things? So wheatberry salad, and then I can add, then it starts to come together. Then I'm like, okay, what other vegetables do I have? Well, I have some onion, I could put that in there with it, and I have some broccoli, I can put that. So then it becomes like a really true like no waste meal based on just kind of into like trying to tap into the intuition, like what would go well with this. And then you can build upon those couple of ingredients, similar to what Juliana mentioned. Like you have your grain, you have your vegetable, and then, I might think to myself, well, what protein do I have on hand? Maybe some chickpeas or some black beans or some tofu. So just considering what's on hand. And I really lead from that approach, just really so I'm not wasting and I'm getting all that nutrition rather than wasting it.
Yeah, I love that approach. And I didn't used to think in no waste perspectives, especially when I was like younger in the kitchen, but it really can help transform a dish when you're really thinking consciously. How can I use as much of this up as I can?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know many of our recipes in the library have been inspired by no waste too.
So many. Yes. Yeah. Such an important concept for multiple reasons, for health, financial reasons, and the planet. So like it's just such a and it's an inspiring way. It feels good. Like it just I think it like kind of sparks more creativity in the kitchen because it just feels good not to waste food. And to know that you're eating something that's, that you purchase with intention. That's good for you. But I will say, so when I mentioned when we started on here, I'm like, let's start with the basics. What is intuition? But I want to backtrack for a second because intuitive cooking is not really basic. It's more like, I feel like it's more abstract and it's definitely like a broad term and it can mean something different for everybody.
Mhm.
But I do want to go into some basics, into the culinary component, because I think before we can hone our intuitive cooking, we do need some like basic culinary skills, like to be confident in the kitchen and to be confident in honing in your own um, creativity. And for me, like I know for me, like I needed at least like one good knife and some nice knife skills. Just learning, how to cook or cut an onion or um, having a sharp knife on hand so that the process is smooth. It just like helps to build confidence and makes it a more enjoyable experience and takes a lot of the stress out of it. And then having some just basic kitchen tools. For me, one of my first tools was a food processor, and that's just something that really helped to um, boost the creativity because the more things can be made. You can make pestos, you can make nut butters. So having some basic kitchen tools on hand is really important. I think that is like one of the foundations, at least for me personally, that needed to come before I could really tap into the intuitive side. What about you? How do you feel about that?
I completely agree. uh, Juliana did say that everybody has that intuitive knowing, and that's 100% true. But I think the way to get it to grow is really having some basic skill and understanding. The kitchen techniques or the kitchen skills are very important to know, as well as just understanding how taste works. So if you know the five tastes, which are sweet, bitter, salty, umami, and sour, the more you use them, the more of a chance you're going to be able to in the future create something without thinking so much about how they pair together. And if you really want to get into the nerdy science of taste, it actually, each taste registers in a different spot on the tongue, which is pretty interesting. The next time you have something umami, just notice where it hits you. It's usually in the back of your mouth, which when I learned that, I was like, that's so true. So it's pretty cool to see how like taste will come across your palate, and that's really what helps to develop a palate. And the same thing with smell. So the concept of taste, smell, they work simultaneously and they almost, I would say, register in your brain at the same time, which is how you can maybe walk into a candy store and you'll immediately get hit with this sweet, sweet scent. But depending on which sweet scent is peeking out the most, let's say vanilla, that might be the thing you taste in your mouth almost at the exact same time without you even having to have taken a bite of something with vanilla in it. And a lot
Mhm.
of that does come from muscle memory. So if you've never tried something before, the taste part of that is not really going to be developed. But once you taste it and you recognize its smell moving forward, you'll likely be able to get a sense of how that tastes in the mouth, what that smells like, and what it could do with other tastes. So one of the
Mhm.
recipes that we have that I think is a really great combination of like sweet and bitter is our cinnamon grapefruit recipe. And it's very simple. I think you just use a little bit of maple syrup, grapefruit, some almond, and cinnamon. And even without the maple syrup, like the sweetness of the cinnamon pairs really well with the bitterness of the grapefruit. And those two things seem so unexpected, but because sweet and bitter can be paired well together, especially if there's a special magical ingredient, fat, it kind of helps to just
Yes.
blend everything together on the tongue. So if you're ever making something, this is a really good tip. And you're maybe practicing the taste, smell, everything kind of smells like it's in harmony, and you taste it, but you're like, something's missing. It might be some fat, because fat does wonders for like either enhancing a flavor or melding flavors together to make them more harmonious. So I say definitely understanding the five tastes is helpful for intuitive
I love
cooking.
that. Yeah, I love that you talked about that. The our taste, it's such an interesting concept. And I think that what you just described is really um it's just something I feel like, at least for me, like I take it for granted. Like, just, you kind of like put things in your mouth and you taste it, but you're not really super, you're not hyper aware of where it's hitting and everything that you're tasting. And maybe some people are. My husband, for example, is very much like can name everything right away. Where for me, it takes a minute. So I think developing that sense of taste, like what you said, is important, just to enjoy your food more, but also to lend to this topic, intuitive cooking, and also just to, in general, heighten awareness. Like, it brings you more aware of not just your taste, but your other senses too. So maybe it extends out into other areas of life. Maybe you're more present and more aware and more, like I like to think that
Mhm.
anyway. So that practice, I think, would be really cool. So thanks for mentioning that.
I agree with you. I think that they're all intertwined.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the more you practice, well, you mentioned muscle memory, and I think just, if you're working that muscle memory, then you're working other areas, and I think that, yeah, it could be extended. It feels like it could be extended outside of into other things, aspects, which is great. When you enhance your senses, I think everything is enhanced. So you gave a really great example of the grapefruit with cinnamon being, maybe unsuspecting flavors that would go together, but they really do complement each other. Um, can you give any other examples of how you use Juliana's either taste, smell, or her two fit um, strategies in intuitive cooking?
Yeah. So for me, like taste smell is, I think, how I lead in intuitive cooking. Um, Without it, it's actually really hard for me to balance recipes or any dish. And one example that is in the library is our honey melon matcha creamsicle smoothie. So this was a smoothie I had developed years ago when I was really wanting ice cream, but I was like, okay, I don't have any ice cream. And at the time, I was like pretty much almost fully raw. And I think I was doing a green juice challenge of some sort and got very bored. And I was like, melons are green, or honeydew melons are green. So this counts. And I blended honeydew melon and almond milk with a little bit of vanilla together, and it really did taste like melted ice cream. So I wanted to bring that to FRN, but I knew I had to enhance the nutrition some kind of way. So that's how things like cauliflower and hemp seed and matcha made an appearance. But those also have very prominent individual flavors, and it was sort of dulling that sweet, light, creamy melon taste that the original smoothie had. And the sparkle, the magical sparkle of the creamsicle kind of got lost. So I was trying to figure out what could I do to, round this out a little bit more, because I really want this to be a great smoothie. And I had actually asked you for some advice. And so we were playing around with the idea of maybe some mint or some lime, which both, I love the idea of that. But then when I went to taste it, I realized that they too were also very strong, and I was still losing some of that melon.
Yes.
um, but lucky for me, the day I was developing this, I had some basil on hand from another recipe, and I got a whiff of the sweet basil scent. And that's when I had the idea, like, oh, well, why don't I try this? Like, it has that sweet element to it. Basil is known to be sweet and floral. And although you don't see it a lot in sweeter things, it does make an appearance in some desserts. Um, so I was like, let's give it a try and see what happens. We know that mint is a little too overpowering. Maybe basil won't be. And I added a few leaves. I couldn't really taste it too much, but the smell wasn't off either. So I just kept trying, and I worked my way up to 10 basil leaves. and I ended up loving it. And it was the exact thing that the smoothie was missing because I also didn't want to add a bunch more sweetener.
Mhm.
And it really helped to give it a very well-rounded, fresh, sweet flavor, but it also gave it like a light hint of floral, which worked so well with the matcha. It was probably one of the biggest surprises in one of my favorite smoothies that's in the library. So yeah, using taste, smell really helped guide what went into the smoothie, and it ended up being a success and better than my original version, which was just honey, dew melon, and almond milk.
I love the whole story, the evolution of that though, and how, you wanted to recreate something that was like from childhood, and then you considered the ingredients and then recreate it for Food Revolution Network, but you knew what had to go into it, and how you walked past the basil and smelled it and then just recognize that sweet flavor. That's an amazing story. And I should say an amazing success story. And so cool that it's just like, it feels right. That's really tapping into your own intuition because you just followed your senses and what you needed to do it like intuitively, and it worked out. But I will say, just for the folks at home, like sometimes it doesn't work out for us too.
A
Sometimes
lot
it
of the
does work
time.
out perfectly. Yeah, like a lot of the time too. It doesn't always. So, but the point is, don't be afraid to experiment. I think, you were like, let me try a little. And also, I feel like a good point from your story is to start with small. Like you thought basil would be good, but you didn't know you were going to end up with 10 leaves in there. So start with a couple, see how it is. Maybe you need a little bit more. And, yeah, so starting small and then graduating from there so that you don't ruin before you ruin. But you just never know. So have fun experimenting.
Have fun experimenting. And don't feel bad if you add a lot. That's the muscle memory piece. I used to be a person that would just dump a ton in there. And then I
Yeah.
realized I had to dial it back. So it's okay to start slow and build.
Yes, absolutely.
How about for
Yeah.
you? Are there any recipes that fall into some of Juliana's teaching?
Yeah. Well, we talked about color, and when I was like selecting what ingredients I would use in the sauce that we were creating together. And I wasn't thinking about color at that time, but I guess we were creating a brown sauce. But there was a sauce that I created uh, not too long ago, green tahini sauce, and it was sparked of the idea of just like pretty much everyone loves sauces. I know like we all love sauces here at FRN. And the idea of a sauce is to like enhance a dish, and it's kind of indulgent. When you think of a sauce, it's these creamy, rich, indulgent flavors that just like really enhance any dish that the sauce is being added to. So I wanted that same thing, but I also wanted it to be green. I was like, I wanted to be a superfood sauce so that people feel really good about adding this, knowing that they are not just enhancing the flavors and the textures of that meal, but also enhancing their nutritional value. And by just seeing the color green, of course, you automatically think like, okay, this is going to be, all of the things that are green, kale and arugula and avocado. Like when we think of those foods, we think like, wow, nutrient dense foods that are really going to help us thrive. So yeah, that was the lead. And with that, I was thinking about color. I knew that I wanted the base to be something creamy. So I went with tahini. Tahini is like, a tan color. I thought if I put something green in there, the tahini color is not going to matter too much. If it's a nice, vibrant green, it'll just really capture that green essence. But I think I could have also used like tofu, like silken tofu. That's white, obviously. You can, whatever you add to that, you can create these beautiful colors. Or you can do nuts. There's a lot of fats that are going to be the carriers of the sauce and the creamy base that will allow you to add any color you want to it. So yeah, so started with tahini, and then I wanted it to be like a traditional sauce flavor. So we've got the tahini for a little nuttiness, but I wanted to have some citrus in there. So I ended up adding some citrus, and then I was just thinking about the colors. So I didn't want it to take on the strong earthiness of kale or like a bitter flavor of kale. So I was like, it's not kale. That's not going to be the green superstar in this. Arugula is delicious if you want something peppery, but I wasn't going for pepper. So I went with spinach because I felt like that's just the most neutral of all the flavors. I think you could also probably do like a romaine lettuce if that, you know, that was an option, or if that's what's on hand for you too, but something with a neutral flavor. So I went with spinach, and then also added cilantro, which some would argue that that is not a neutral flavor at all. I along with the citrus, you know, thinking about balancing flavors, I just wanted something a little more earthy. And I feel like cilantro can, like herbs, it could be parsley, but just like, you know, something earthy to bring some of the like acidity from the citrus down a little bit. And it really was kind of what it needed. I was adding it as I was going. So I had the spinach first and then added a little bit of cilantro. But again, like if a cilantro is a very prominent flavor or something that you don't enjoy, parsley fits well in its place. But yeah, just adding or like rounding out the balancing the flavors with some earthiness. That's how that, but it was a bonus because it was also green. So, you know, it just enhanced that green flavor. So yeah, I guess um, I'm not sure if that's one of her like core principles is leading with color, but definitely thinking about that's kind of what like the process that went behind the green tahini sauce is leading with color, and then just thinking about what foods could enhance that or like balance out those flavors. I mean, you could consider like other green if you really wanted to be like super duper green. You could add avocado as your base and have that
Mm.
as your like creamy base. That's green too. So thinking about your green foods and what other green aspects you can add that would maybe enhance the texture and the flavor and color of that sauce.
Yeah. And it's so cool to see how like all of these foods that have a color in common can come together to make something really delicious. And I'm sure you ended up with a very vibrant, bright green dressing that you probably wanted to just pour over everything, which could be another good way
Right.
to entice you to try other colors now that you've got all this really bright, saturated green, creamy dressing. That's pretty exciting.
Exactly. You can like kind of lead just with colors. You could do a purple sauce and have another like neutral colored base and then add purple onion to it. And maybe pomegranates will go with that to add a little sweetness and tart and just experiment. That could be a fun like holiday sauce. Um, yeah, just another way of thinking of things, tapping into the creativity in the kitchen. Yeah. Well, it was fun to hear your stories and some of your process and your intuitive cooking skills or like techniques or how you harness your intuition in the
Yeah.
kitchen.
It's very fun to share. I feel like it's hard to talk about like how to conceptualize, I guess, being an intuitive cook, but it was fun talking about it and sharing just the various ways we make many other recipes for all the members to enjoy. So as you're looking to the library, maybe ask yourself, did they tap into their intuition on this one to deliver this yummy recipe we have this week? The answer might be yes.
Yeah, right, right. We didn't even know it until we listened to the interview ourselves, and we're like, "Oh, maybe we're using some of these techniques." But definitely for folks at home, consider like just maybe being aware as well as you're moving through your own kitchen and how you're using some of these techniques that you might not have been privy to before, but you might be tapping into those as well and already using your own intuition. And moving forward, you can continue to harness other ways to use it. So we hope you enjoyed today, and please share if you'd like to share your own stories. We'd love to hear about them. Comment and share and let us know how you use your intuition in the kitchen. Thanks, everyone.